Hey there, survivors. If you can hear me, it means you're still alive. This is Jack's Nightmares, and wherever you listen from, I'm glad you made it. Now, get comfortable. This is your next story.
My name is Sienna Keene, and I know this is not a local breakdown before my shift even starts. The proof is spread across 3 screens in the maintenance break room and 2 radios talking over each other on the counter. One television is stuck on a national cable feed with the sound muted and closed captions rolling too fast to read clean. The headline bar keeps repeating port closures on the East Coast, a hospital lockdown in Seattle, rail stoppages outside Chicago, and emergency declarations in places that are too far apart to explain away as one bad storm or one bad riot. The second screen is showing a foreign channel through a lagging satellite link. I catch a map of Europe with red blocks over major cities, then a cut to a cargo terminal somewhere overseas where forklifts are parked crooked and nobody is moving in a straight line. The third screen is our rig traffic display, and vessel status icons are dropping off one by one as ships lose contact or shut off transponders. On the radio side, I have marine band traffic from the coast stepping on company dispatch, and both are carrying the same message in different words. Crews not reporting, medics overwhelmed, roads closed, aircraft grounded, hold position, and wait for instruction. Nobody in the room says the world is ending. Nobody needs to. It is all over the screens already. I am standing at the counter with a paper cup of coffee I have not touched when Len Dwyer comes through the door and kills the cable audio with the remote. He is the yard maintenance lead, thick shoulders, bad knee, never dramatic. That is part of why everybody listens when he speaks. He tells us the company has suspended outbound rotations, pulled back all coastal service runs, and started consolidating whoever is left at the support yard. He says the airstrip is closed to civilian traffic. He says the medevac flight out of Prudhoe turned around with a sick passenger after one crewman got hurt in the cabin. He says to top off bottles, keep work gear on, and stay off the open road until security tells us otherwise. One man at the table asks if this is terrorism. Len tells him no. Another asks if the National Guard is coming. Len says he does not know. Nobody asks if this is only Alaska. The room already knows better. The screen with the foreign channel freezes on a lower third graphic in another language, and even without the words I can read the pattern. A subway station, armed police, a crowd moving too fast for order. That same pattern was on a feed from Montreal 10 minutes earlier. Before that it was Busan. Before that it was Boston. I work offshore electrical maintenance out of a Beaufort support yard west of Deadhorse. My normal shift is simple on paper. Check yardside distribution for the dock pumps, inspect stored panels for Petrel Six, sign off on a replacement contactor in the weatherproof switch box behind Shed 3, then help prep a crate of spares that would have gone out on the next marine service run if the season had not already gone sideways. Petrel 6 is a cold-stacked jack-up drilling rig in shallow lease water a couple miles off the coast. We shut the heavy systems down before freeze-up, but not everything goes dead on a rig. Emergency batteries stay aboard. Fire doors stay aboard. Tools, bunks, galley stores, reserve water capacity, utility manuals, spare filters, bedding, and chemical sanitation stores stay aboard. I know that inventory well. I signed half of it back into storage myself. While other people in the break room keep staring at the screens, I start making a list in my head of what stays useful after the company stops acting like a company. Len catches me looking toward the supply cage and jerks his head for me to follow him. We step into the corridor outside the break room, where the noise drops and I can hear the wind pushing snow across the exterior cladding. He keeps his voice low. He says the bus convoy that was supposed to take non-essential hands inland got hung up at the checkpoint, then one bus went silent. He says the clinic in town asked for diesel for backup heat, then stopped answering. He says dispatch tried to reach corporate through the SAT link and got a recorded message telling them to conserve bandwidth for emergency use. That part lands harder than anything from the news channels. A recorded system message means no operator, no office, no executive assistant, no backup desk in another state ready to pick up. Len asks me how long I think shore power at the yard will hold if the line crews stop responding. I tell him I do not trust it past tonight if weather gets worse and the load shifts dirty. He nods once and opens the caged cabinet under the corridor stairs with his master key. He tells me to take what I can carry without looking greedy. I do not waste time pretending I am above that. I pull terminal blocks, inline fuses, weather-rated wire, crimp connectors, shrink sleeves, 2 headlamps, spare batteries, a handheld meter, and a compact toolkit with insulated screwdrivers that fits in a canvas roll. Then, I reach for 2 binders on the top shelf. One is Petrel 6 electrical distribution, revised after a panel fire the previous winter. The other is utility systems, domestic water, reserve water, black water vacuum line layout, galley power, emergency ventilation, and the compact desalination skid that stayed on the rig during cold stack. Len watches me take both and says, "Good." He reaches into a lower locker and hands me a sealed pouch of panel keys and breaker tags. He is not giving orders anymore. He is helping me think around the same corner he already sees. The first hard proof from inside our own yard comes through the roll-up door of the machine shop. Farid Nassar from the marine crew stumbles in with one glove off, blood on his sleeve, and a look on his face that tells me he has spent the last 10 minutes seeing things stop making sense. The men near the drill press start asking questions all at once. Farid talks over them and keeps losing the thread. He says the checkpoint bus took on 2 sick workers from a utility station up the road. He says one of the sick men was tied into a seat with cargo straps, then came loose when the bus hit ice. He says the driver opened the folding door at the gate and the whole line broke apart. He keeps saying the man on the floor would not stay down and would not answer his own name. There is a split in the skin near Farid's wrist where his cuff rode back. June Bissett from dispatch sees it at the same time I do. She tells him to move away from the sink. He does not listen. He gets halfway there before somebody outside starts hammering the main door with both hands. June kills the overhead lights and orders the welders to drag the fabrication table across the roll-up. Len and I shove the oxygen cart sideways behind it. Everybody in the shop goes quiet once the pounding hits again. It is not somebody trying the handle. It is wide, flat contact with no pause to think, no voice attached, no pattern that sounds like a worker trying to get back in from the cold. June takes the satellite phone off her belt and tries to raise the admin office, then security, then the clinic. She gets either dead air or half a sentence and static. Through the narrow gap by the door track, I can see the yard in strips. Snow is blowing low and hard now. A loader sits with the bucket raised halfway. One pickup is turned nose first into the fence. There is a person on the ground near the forklift lane, and another person bent over him with both hands planted on the snow. Then the second man jerks upright and starts moving toward the shop wall in a crooked line that never changes speed. He slams into the siding by the personnel door and keeps pressing there until he loses his footing and goes down, then gets up again. Nobody in the shop calls it by one name. Farid says the sick have gone feral. One welder says deadheads, which gets him a hard look from Len. June says infected and sticks with it. I do too. The word fits what we know, and does not pretend we know more than we do. Blood and saliva contact have been on the news since yesterday. Fever, confusion, aggression, loss of speech, rapid decline. Half the anchors were still saying mass psychogenic events and contaminated drugs the first night. That line is gone by now. What replaced it is worse. Video from airports, video from ferries, video from police body cameras, shipping advisories on marine ban telling vessels to deny boarding without verified manifests. A Russian icebreaker captain on shortwave an hour ago saying he had lost crew at anchor and was sealing lower compartments. A woman on an Australian feed talking from a studio by emergency lamp after the control room staff walked out. If all of those feeds were fake, the radio traffic inside our own yard would still make it real. We stay in the shop close to an hour, while the weather keeps building, and the yard gets less human each time I look. One of the mechanics wants to make a run for the housing modules. June tells him to sit down and think about windows, hallway corners, and the fact that nobody knows who is already inside. Another man says the state will send buses. Len says the road crews are not even clearing the north route now. I check the shop panel twice, top off every water bottle I can find while pressure holds, and strip useful items from the emergency cabinet near the first aid bench. Gloves, thermal socks, gauze, tape, burn cream, a foil blanket. The big things in the room are all bad shelter choices. Too many exterior walls. Too much noise if we have to work. Not enough doors that can be sealed without trapping ourselves. Through the slit at the track, I watch a service truck roll backward on the drifted grade until it bumps a light pole and stops. Nobody is driving it. The cab door is open. Beyond the yard fence I can see red and blue lights on the road, not moving, fading in and out through the snow. My mind keeps circling back to Petrel Six. Not as some perfect refuge. It is a hard place with 1,000 ways to get hurt if systems stay dead. But it has the one thing shore does not have anymore, and that is controlled access. The rig sits above the water on fixed legs with one boat landing, enclosed stair towers, steel fire doors, watertight compartment boundaries, and accommodation corridors built to isolate heat and smoke. It was stocked to support rotating crews for months at a time before we put it into cold stack. Nobody cleared all of that out. Company accounting never moves that fast. If I can get aboard, bring one generator online, and lock down one living section, I can stop fighting the same ground-level chaos that is already breaking this yard apart. I watch a figure walk into the forklift shed door again and again outside, and decide I am done pretending an inland convoy is going to save us. I take Len aside near the compressor bay and lay it out plain. The shop will not hold once dark comes. We have too many people, too much glass, and no real sleeping setup. The company housing is worse. The admin building is a trap with windows all around. The rig gives me elevation, stores, and doors. Len looks at the dark shop around us, then through the slit in the track, then back at me. He does not argue much. He asks how I plan to get there in this weather. I tell him the marine skiff is at the dock, and I serviced the outboard at the end of last week. He asks what I need. I tell him fuel, immersion gear, battery lights, water containers, and anything from the yard emergency locker that can keep one person alive while I sort the rig systems. His face changes when I say one person. He knows what that means for whoever stays here. He reaches into his pocket, feels for the master keys, and says, "Take what you can carry. Don't overload the boat." The emergency locker in the side office gives me more than I expected, and less than I want. One immersion suit in my size. One marine flare box with 3 red flares and a smoke canister. One battered handheld VHF. One winter sleeping bag vacuum sealed in plastic. 2 wool blankets. A camp stove with 1 fuel canister. A filtered water jug. 4 chemical heat packs. I ask Len about the shotgun mounted in the cabinet. He stares at it for a second, then takes it down and checks the action. He keeps the gun for the shop and slides 4 shells across the desk toward me for the flare pouch instead, then changes his mind and gives me the flare launcher from the marine rack. He knows noise on the rig can turn one problem into several. From the maintenance stores I add diesel filters, a priming bulb, a box of mixed gaskets, 1 roll of heavy tape, spare fuses, and a coil of weather-rated cable. June comes in while I am packing and pushes 2 more water bottles and a sack of ration bars into the duffel without saying much. Her face is pale and flat. She asks me to light the rig beacon if I get power up. I tell her I will use it twice at dusk if I can do it without drawing the whole coast. I leave through the rear personnel door while Len and June hold the shop with the others. The cold outside is sharper now, and the snow is running almost sideways between the buildings. I cut behind the generator shed, stay low along the fuel berm, and avoid the open center lane. There are tracks everywhere in the snow, but no order to them. Boots crossing boots. 1 set dragging, 1 set bare in places where socks tore through. Halfway to the dock office, I hear a metal rattle behind me and turn in time to see a man in coveralls coming around the corner of the wash bay. I know him, Boyd Kessler from vehicle maintenance. He used to complain about every night shift and every frozen bolt. Now his face is cut open above one eye and packed with blown snow. He walks straight at me without lifting his hands or saying my name. I move offline, swing the tool bag into his forearm to turn him, and keep going while he has to recover his footing. Looking back would waste distance and sightline, so I do not. The dock office is unlocked and half dark. 1 monitor on the desk is still on backup power, showing a frozen weather radar image with the timestamp 23 minutes old. There is a woman in an orange float coat down near the inner door. She is not moving. Her handheld radio is trapped under her side and crushed at the antenna joint. I kneel long enough to pull the key ring from her vest clip, take the radio, and open the drawer marked Marine. Inside are 2 spare fuel cans, mooring gloves, a roll of line, and the skiff logbook with the last entry made yesterday at 1600 by Farid. I leave the logbook. Paper can wait, fuel cannot. Out through the side window I can see the skiff still tied in the lee pocket off the dock, low in the water under a skin of fresh snow. One stern line is half buried. Nobody touched it after the last run. I work the launch by order, not speed. Rushing around boats in cold weather leads to dropped gear, bad knots, and fuel in the bilge. I clear the stern first, open the engine cover, check the fuel line, squeeze the primer bulb, and inspect the oil reservoir. Then I drain slush out of the cargo well, kick loose a frozen tie-down, and load the heavy gear low and centered, tools amidships, water aft, fuel strapped against the bulkhead, bedding and binders under a tarp inside the console shelter, the flare box and VHF under the seat where I can reach them without crawling over cargo. I keep the pry bar under the bench and the bolt cutters in the bow. The immersion suit goes on last. I leave the hood back while I cast off so I can hear the engine and the hull. On the radio, I catch one more fragment of the outside world before I leave. A Coast Guard relay repeats a shelter advisory for multiple ports and warns all civilian vessels to avoid unauthorized pickups. Then the voice cuts and another station breaks in from far south with a call for medical help and coordinates that have no business reaching us up here. The range on that transmission tells me the ionosphere is doing its own ugly work, or half the usual traffic chain is gone, and the channels are opening in strange ways. Either way, the whole map is in trouble. The outboard starts on the second pull, and idles rough until I work the choke. I ease the skiff clear of the dock, turn into the wind, and point toward the dark shape offshore that I can barely hold in sight between curtains of snow. Once I leave the harbor pocket, the chop gets worse. The bow rises, falls, slaps, and throws spray across the console. I keep the throttle lower than I want, and steer by known shapes more than markers. The starboard rig leg, the dim buoy light to the south, the black line where shore has already turned into one flat band with no detail left. Halfway out, I look back once and see the support yard as a faint cluster of yellow points, some steady, some blinking, some gone. Beyond it, the road is dark. No moving headlights, no plow, no convoy. On the portable set, a newsreader from somewhere in the lower 48 comes through in clipped pieces between bursts of static. Federal continuity sites activated, overseas bases sealed, major exchanges closed, telecommunications degraded across multiple regions. That is enough. I stop trying to measure whether this is national or global. Nothing in any of those words leaves room for normal life tomorrow. Petrel Six comes out of the weather in layers. First the legs, then the boat landing, then the shadow of the hull over the water and the block of the accommodation module above it. No running lights, no deck flood, no beacon, no generator exhaust. I bring the skiff around to the lee side and bump once off the hanging tires before I catch the landing rail with the boat hook. The ladder is glazed over and the lower rungs are taking spray. I tie off with 2 lines, test both, then haul the cargo up in stages. Fuel first, tools second, water third. The binders go under my coat for the climb. By the time I get my boots onto the grated platform, my gloves are wet through at the fingertips and snow has packed into the seams around my wrists. I strip out of the immersion suit under the stair tower, where the wind is broken a little, hang it over a warm-looking pipe that is not warm at all, and clip the VHF to my belt. Once I open the inner door and step inside, the wind cuts out hard enough that the silence feels heavier than the cold did outside. I know this rig. I know the route from the boat landing to the main stair tower, from there to the accommodation block, from the galley to the utility corridor, and down to the emergency generator room. Knowing a route on a workday is not the same as walking it alone with the lights dead, and the whole structure holding its breath around you. My headlamp catches rust runs, safety placards, old boot scuffs, and a mop bucket somebody left in a corner months ago. Everything else is angles and dark doors. I do not start wandering. I follow the plan I built in the shop. Accommodation first, food second, water third, generator fourth. I check each compartment the same way. Open low, light left, light right, ceiling, under bunks, behind shower curtains, inside lockers that can fit a body. Then I chalk the door after I clear it. In the galley I find dry stores intact in broad terms and stripped in detail. Whole racks of canned goods remain, rice bags remain, powdered milk remains, coffee remains, but several shelves show gaps that do not fit the inventory cards zip-tied to the uprights. Somebody did not raid in a rush. Somebody came back more than once and chose what to carry. I settle on one short corridor in the starboard accommodation section for my living area. 2 crew cabins, 1 washroom, linen closet, fire door at both ends, close enough to the galley route that I do not need to cross open deck if systems stay dead. I clear the cabins, strip the clean bedding, drag mattresses into the inner room, and build a small sleeping core on the lower bunk against the interior wall. I tape a blanket over the porthole, pack spare linen around the door edges, and wedge a chair under the washroom latch that does not catch. Then, I make a second pass with more discipline. I mark every cabinet I open. I count the towels. I note the missing emergency flashlight from the wall bracket outside the washroom. That one matters. Company crews steal gloves and coffee. They do not usually steal wall-mounted emergency lights off a dead rig, unless they are staying longer than a shift. I get one cold meal down in the cabin while I read through the utility binder by lantern light. Reserve domestic water remains in the upper service tank if the lines did not crack after shutdown. The compact desalination skid can support low occupancy if the intake stays open and the seals hold. The Blackwater vacuum system is not worth trusting until I test every section between the living block and collection tank, and I am not doing that first night. Power decides everything. Without power, I am camping inside a steel shell that will freeze by morning. With power, I can light one corridor, run one heater circuit if the load allows, warm galley equipment, test reserve water pumps, charge batteries, and use the radio room without draining handhelds dry. I leave the food half finished, pull my gloves back on, and head for the generator deck with the binder under one arm and the maintenance kit in the other hand. The emergency generator room gives me the same first answer every failed system gives. Start with what can stop it before you start replacing parts. Fuel shutoff lever, emergency stop reset, air intake damper, battery bank disconnect, output breaker position. Nothing is catastrophically damaged. That is the good news. The bad news is colder and slower. The day tank level is low. The primary filter bowl has sludge at the bottom. One battery bank is weak enough that the panel lights fade when I test it. I change the filter with hands that keep slipping on the housing, bleed the line, prime it until fuel stops burping through the clear section, and carry a cracked jump pack from the radio locker to the generator room after the first start attempt rolls over and dies. The second attempt gives me 2 rough catches and a shutdown. On the third, I hold the sequence longer, listen to the engine find itself, and watch oil pressure climb through the dirty glass. The sound fills the room, then the corridor, then the structure around me. It is not a clean run. It hunts a little. It is alive enough. I do not get greedy once the set is stable. I close only the essential feeder for the accommodation emergency circuit, then bring up the galley outlets, a corridor run, the radio room, and my chosen living block. One ballast pops overhead in the generator passage and sprays dust. I leave it dead. I leave most of the rig dark. Every extra load burns fuel I may not be able to replace. Every extra light gives away more of my position if anybody on shore can still see across the weather. I log the runtime on the back of a catering invoice, check the frequency once more, and head back up with one lantern in my left hand and the meter in my right. The lit corridor on the accommodation deck looks better than darkness and worse than I hoped. Half the tubes are weak. The air has no warmth in it yet. But now, I can move without spending batteries every second, and the rig has started answering me instead of sitting there dead. With power on, I work faster. I boil reserve line water in the galley after running it long enough to clear the stale taste, fill 2 containers, and set one aside for drinking only. I make a fuel log. I pull one portable lantern from stores and hang it low in the stair tower where it lights the landings without shining straight through any exterior glass. I check the radio room and bring the marine set alive under emergency feed. Static, carrier tones, fragments of speech. A tug captain near Nome asking for any port taking fuel. A woman from somewhere in British Columbia reading names off a list and breaking halfway through. Military traffic encrypted on another channel. One weather bulletin. One repeated federal civil advisory. Shelter in place if secure. Limit travel. Avoid contact with symptomatic persons. Expect service failure. None of it has the tone of a system that expects to regain control by morning. It sounds like people reading from sheets that were written for a storm or a blackout and trying to stretch those words over something much larger. I do one controlled sweep near my corridor and mark every cleared compartment with chalk. I am not trying to own the whole rig tonight. I am trying to know one section better than any person or problem moving through it. Outside the bonded locker near the tool crib, I stop and kneel under the lantern. The padlock is hanging closed, but the shackle has already been cut and seated back through the eye to fool a quick glance. Inside the locker I find ration cartons torn open, blanket packaging split, and 2 cases of bottled water gone. The dust on the lower shelf is disturbed in a neat path, not a frantic scrape. That means repeated use. I stand there a second with the lantern angled low and look at the deck. Boot prints, not old work prints dried into grime from before shutdown. Wet tracks crossing the same spot more than once, recent enough that the edges still hold shape. I set the lantern down with the beam low and follow the tracks as far as I can without crossing my own chalk line. The prints come out of the galley side passage, angle past the bonded locker, then turn toward the aft service corridor that leads to the old pipe handling stores and one of the cargo stair runs. I do not keep walking after that. I already know 2 things I need. 1, I am not alone. 2, the person moving around here knows how to stay off the obvious routes. I back up the way I came, stop at each door, and check my chalk marks again. Nobody crossed into my corridor yet. That can change fast once a man hears a generator and sees emergency lights. I take the lantern, the pry bar, and the 2 cases of bottled water I brought from shore, and I move everything that matters into the inner cabin before I do anything else. I spend the next hour shrinking my footprint, food into one locked locker in the linen closet, water under the lower bunk behind spare mattresses, tools split 3 ways so one loss does not take all my ability to work. The binders go inside a pillowcase and under my sleeping bag, where damp air will not curl the pages. I move the camp stove to the washroom sink so I can cook with the door shut and the vent cracked. I strip the batteries out of one lantern and keep them in my pocket. Then, I start making noise traps that will not draw the whole rig. A metal spoon through the handle of the galley end fire door. 2 coffee mugs balanced inside the linen closet door. 1 empty water bottle laid sideways on the floor in the outer cabin, so any person coming through in the dark will kick it before he reaches my bunk. None of it stops a determined man. It gives me a few seconds and a direction. I leave the corridor lights on for another 15 minutes while I work at the panel outside the washroom. The labels on Petrel 6 were sloppy even before shutdown, and cold stack never improves documentation. I pull the cover, trace the emergency circuit for my corridor and the galley branch, and mark the breakers with tape from my kit. Then, I do something I never would have done on a live workday. I cut power to 3 nearby corridor runs that I do not need, one by one, and watch which sections fall dark. If the men aboard want easy movement, I am not helping them. The rig shrinks again when those tubes go out. My corridor stays lit. The galley stays lit. The stair tower near my cabin stays lit. Everything beyond that becomes a set of black seams and metal doors that I can learn better than they can. When I go back to the radio room, the marine set is carrying more proof that shore is finished for now. A bulk carrier off the Canadian side is calling for medical guidance and getting none. A station from far south repeats a federal civil advisory that has lost half its lines to static. One voice from a platform in the Gulf keeps asking if anybody has a working harbour master. Nobody answers him by name. Another station says airports around Houston are locked down and no medevac slots are open. Then, a clipped government voice cuts across with an order for offshore facilities to deny unscreened boarding, conserve fuel, and maintain compartment control if possible. That last phrase is the closest thing to useful advice I have heard all day. I write it on the top of my fuel log. Compartment control. That is the whole rig now. I sleep in my coveralls with my boots unlaced beside the bunk and the pry bar across the blanket. I do not sleep long. The spoon at the galley fire door rattles once, then stops. I open my eyes and lie still with the lantern off. No second noise, no footsteps, no door dog turning. After a minute, I slide out of the bunk, lace my boots in the dark, and put one hand on the fire door. Cold metal, no vibration from anyone leaning on it. I wait another full minute, then open the washroom vent a crack and listen through the duct. I hear the generator below, steady but rough. I hear one far-off bang from somewhere in the lower structure, maybe a loose panel or something shifting with the wind. Then I hear a man cough beyond the galley side door and stop himself halfway through it. Close, closer than I wanted the first night. Morning only exists here by the clock on my watch and the shade of grey at the edge of the porthole blanket. I make coffee thick enough to cut the stale taste in my mouth and eat 2 ration bars while reading the water section of the utility binder again. Reserve tank first, desalination second. If the reserve line gives me enough for a day, I buy myself time to work the skid clean. If it does not, I spend my day in the lower utility deck thawing lines and scraping intake strainers while somebody else moves around the rig above me. I decide on reserve tank first. Before I leave the corridor, I write one message on the back of a menu card and tape it to the outer side of the galley fire door. If you are on board and unhurt, do not touch power, water, Oregon fuel systems. Stay out of starboard crew corridor. I do not sign my name. Names make a false start feel personal. The galley is empty when I step through. My note from last night about the smeared chalk mark is still in my head, so I take the long way around the serving counter and keep the lantern low. The outer pantry door stands open by 2 inches. I know it was latched when I checked it. Inside, 1 crate of canned peaches is missing from the stack nearest the door. Not looted, selected. Somebody aboard can still plan meals. I mark it in my head and keep going. At the reserve water manifold, I crack the service valve and get a hard spit, then a weak stream that steadies enough to fill 1 pot after a minute. Good. Not good enough to waste. I taste nothing but metal and stale line. I boil it anyway, fill 2 containers, and carry them back to my corridor before I do anything louder. When I return for the second run, the note on the galley fire door is gone. That gets me my first direct answer. I stand in the galley with 1 pot in my hand and wait. At first, all I hear is the vibration of the emergency lights and the distant engine beat through the deck. Then, a man speaks from the passage by the old pantry. Not close enough for me to rush. Not far enough to hide the fact that he chose the place. "You got the lights on. Good for you." His voice is rough, older than mine. Not weak, not calm either. I set the pot down and move behind the galley island where stainless steel gives me a little cover and a better angle on the doors. I tell him to step out where I can see both hands. He does not. He says, "No need for that. We've been here before you." I answer, "Then you know the rig dies if the wrong person starts playing with panels." He lets a second pass before he says, "Then keep it running and we can talk." I do not chase a voice into dark passages on the second day of the world ending. I tell him the rules once and keep them short. No one comes into the starboard crew corridor. No one touches the generator room, day tank, galley panel, radio room, reserve water manifold, or stair tower lanterns. Any person who wants food can take it from the galley only while I am present. He laughs once at that. Not a big laugh. More a sound of a man hearing terms he has no plan to accept. Then he says, "You one person." I say, "I'm the one who got your lights back." He does not answer after that. I wait another minute and hear movement retreat through the pantry route and down one of the aft corridors. No names, no promises, no false deal, better than yelling. By noon, I have the first outline of their side of the rig. 1 man with the rough voice. At least 1 other man with smaller boots than mine, based on prints near the bonded locker. More than 1 person eating from the dry stores or the peaches would not have moved so fast. I make another sweep through the nearby accommodation rooms and find 2 bunks in a port corridor stripped to bare mattresses and 1 shower room with damp towels hanging from the hooks. They are using the colder side of the block where the wind hits harder and the lights are dead. That tells me they do not have heat under control, and have been surviving by huddling in blankets and eating whatever they could carry from the stores. If they had power, they would have claimed the good side already. That gives me room, not safety. I spend the rest of the day on water. The compact desalination skid sits on the utility deck below the galley service line, boxed into a narrow machinery space with bad access and old salt crust on half the fittings. The intake strainer is the first problem. It is packed with grit, fibrous sludge, and a strip of plastic that looks torn from a storage bag. The pre-filter housing has a crack at the lip where somebody over-tightened it months ago. I cut a patch from the gasket sheet, clean the seat, and reassemble it, knowing it may hold 1 hour or 1 week depending on pressure. The motor starts under emergency feed after I isolate the heater branch and accept colder air in my corridor. It whines, pushes, then loses prime. I bleed the line, reprime it, and try again. On the third run, it gives me a thin, uneven stream that is too low to trust but enough to prove the system is not dead. Working down there reminds me how easy it is to get sealed into a problem on a rig. Every tool I set down wants to slide under a skid frame or disappear into shadow. Every time I look up from a fitting, I have to remember which side passage leads back to the stair tower and which one dead ends in stored hose. The men aboard know that too. Around mid-afternoon, I hear boot noise above the utility deck and freeze with the wrench in my hand. 2 sets. One heavier, one dragging a little on the right side. They stop near the top of the stair. A voice I have not heard before says, "She got the pump moving." The older voice answers, "Then leave it. Let her finish." They move off again without coming down. That tells me more than they meant to give me. They are watching the systems work. They want the result and not the labor. That means pressure later. When I go back to the generator room to log fuel, I find the day tank level lower than my own numbers allow. I check the sight glass twice and do the math against runtime and load. It does not work out. Somebody siphoned from the service line or the transfer hose while I was on the utility deck. I inspect the hose locker first and find one short length of clear tubing damp at the end and tossed behind a drum of absorbent pads. That is not an accident. I carry the transfer key, the hand pump handle, and the spare filter crate back to my corridor and split them between the bunk, the linen closet, and the washroom ceiling tile. Then, I write another rule, larger this time, and tape it to the galley counter where nobody can miss it. Touch fuel, and the generator stops for everybody. I know rules on paper will not stop a thief. They mark the line before I change tactics. That evening, the younger one comes near my side alone. I know it is not the older voice, and I know it is not the dragging footman from the stair, because the steps are lighter and careful in a way that reads worry, not confidence. He stops outside the galley fire door and clears his throat before he speaks. "We need warm water." I stay behind the door and ask who "we" is. He says, "4 of us." That number lands where I expected it and still feels bigger once spoken out loud. I tell him to step back from the door and slide the empty containers into the galley. After 10 seconds of silence, 2 plastic jugs scrape over the floor. I crack the door enough to pull them through and shut it again. One has a name written on the side in marker, T. Vukic. I do not know him by sight, but I know the name from an old catering manifest. Roustabout, seasonal. I fill the jugs with boiled reserve water, no more than half each, and slide them back. Then I ask the young voice one question. Who siphoned the day tank? He says nothing long enough that I almost send him away empty. Then he says, "Curtis." He says it low, embarrassed, like the word itself might get him hit if the others hear. I ask who is with Curtis. He says, "Doran, Reed, me." I ask if any of them are hurt or sick. He answers too fast. "No." That can mean no, or it can mean not yet. I tell him the next person who touches fuel loses corridor light, galley outlets, and hot water. He says, "Doran says you won't do that." I slide the full jugs through the gap and answer, "Watch me." His footsteps leave fast after that, and I stand there with my hand on the dog, learning the names. Doran becomes a shape in my head before I see his face. Older voice, confident enough to hide and make me work. Let the younger one take the risk of asking for water. Curtis is the one with some engine sense and no patience, or he would not be around a day tank with a siphon tube. Reed I place in the middle until I know better. Thomas Vukic is young enough to take orders and scared enough to break from them when cold and thirst start deciding the day. I do not build a whole theory out of that. I work with what the rig confirms. The next morning, I cut galley outlet power for 1 hour without warning and leave only the corridor lights on. Then, I sit at the radio desk and listen. Within 10 minutes, I hear a door slam on the port accommodation side. Then one shout, then Doran's voice carrying through the duct in an angry whisper I cannot make out word for word. The message goes through fine. Power discipline changes the balance. They can walk around in the dark if they want. They cannot heat canned food, charge a lantern, or test a space heater without the circuits I control. I use that all day while I finish the first stable run on the desalination skid. The patched pre-filter leaks a little at the seam, so I cut the flow and start over with a wider gasket and a slower clamp pressure. The membrane housing shudders under load and throws brine harder than I like. But the fresh side finally settles into a stream strong enough to fill a bottle in less than a minute. I do not celebrate. I line up 6 containers and fill them while the pump stays with me. Then I cut the unit and clean the floor. Water on steel makes one bad turn into a broken wrist. On my way back up the ladder, I hear the men arguing in the port block. Too far for words, close enough for tone. Pressure is building over there. By late afternoon, the weather starts carrying a deeper sound through the legs of the rig. Not wave slap, not wind alone. Shore ice is moving. I go to the lower landing with the binoculars from the radio room and check the line between the rig and the coast. White, grey, broken black water, then more white. Chunks the size of pallets grind past the legs and catch on the old protective collars. Nothing close enough to cross. Nothing I want to ignore either. On shore, the support yard is a dim shape under blowing snow. I can see one roof and the dark line of the fuel berm. No beacon from the shop. No movement. I hold the binoculars on the dock road until the lenses ice up and give me nothing but blur. Then, I go back inside. If anybody made it out there, I cannot help them from this deck in this weather. That night, I see the 4 men together for the first time. I had gone to the galley to move canned food into smaller groups so one theft would not wipe out a whole shelf. I heard voices in the pantry and backed into the serving line before they came through. Doran leads. Thick coat, grey beard coming in rough along his jaw. One shoulder higher than the other from old strain or old pride. Curtis is broader and younger, mechanic hands, fast eyes, nose bent from something that happened before this week. Reed trails them with 2 blankets over one arm and a dented stockpot in his other hand. Thomas hangs back near the doorway, thinner than the rest, face raw from cold, not looking at me until he has to. Nobody runs at me. Nobody puts on manners. Doran looks over the lit galley, the hot plate, the stacked water, then at me, and says, "You made yourself at home." I keep the serving island between us and the flare launcher in my right hand under a towel. It will not stop 4 men if they rush hard, but it can blind a room, start a fire in bad drapes, and make enough confusion for one side to lose more than it gains. I tell them to stay on their side of the floor and say what they came to say. Doran says the same thing men like him always say when a place starts providing something again. He says they held on here through the first days, and that gives them claim. He says I walked into an existing arrangement. I point at the dark corridors, the cold accommodation side, and the stockpot in Reed's hand, and tell him his arrangement was starving in the dark. Curtis takes 1 step forward at that. Thomas stiffens. Reed does not move. Doran's mouth tightens, but his voice stays level. He says, "Then we do this simple. You keep the gear running. We split stores. Everybody gets a cabin." I tell him no. I tell them the only version that works. No one touches power, water, or fuel except me. No one crosses into the starboard corridor. Food can be rationed from the galley at fixed times, with 1 person present from each side. No one moves through the lower utility deck without telling me first. Any man who breaks that loses access to the lit spaces. Doran hears the word rules and treats it like an insult. Curtis hears access and looks ready to make it physical. Reed only looks at the soup cans on the counter. Thomas is looking at the fresh water containers. Doran asks what gives me the right. I answer the plain way. I know the systems. You don't. He tells me Curtis knows engines. Curtis lifts his chin a little at that. I say, Then he knows enough to wreck a panel and freeze everybody. Curtis says, "You talk a lot for one person." I answer, "Try the dark again and count how long your batteries last." Nobody likes that. Nobody says it is false. The standoff in the galley ends without a rush only because hunger is louder than pride for 1 minute. I give them 1 pot of hot water, 6 cans, 1 sleeve of crackers, and 2 battery charge slots in the radio room under my eye. Doran takes the cans without thanking me. Reed takes the pot and nearly spills it, which tells me his hands are not steady from the cold. Curtis keeps looking past me toward the corridor to my side. Thomas does one thing that matters. When Doran turns away, Thomas looks straight at the fire door beyond me, and then at the lantern hanging over the stair tower. 1 quick look each, not random. He is marking the things keeping me alive. He is not planning a friendship. He is planning his options. I do not hold it against him. I adjust to it. After they leave, I cut the radio room outlets and lock the breaker box with one of the panel keys from Len's cabinet. Then, I go through my corridor and move half the water to a new hiding place in the washroom ceiling. The old trick on rigs is thinking 1 good lock solves a shortage. It does not. Split and conceal beats 1 lock once people get hungry and cold. I shift canned food into the cavity behind a removed vent cover, leave lesser items in the visible locker, and tuck the flare launcher under the mattress instead of the shelf. Then, I take the shotgun shells out of the pouch and hide them separately from the old emergency shotgun I do not even have. Ammunition without a gun is still barter in the wrong hands. By the time I finish, my coffee is cold and the generator note says I need a transfer from the bulk tank within the next 10 hours if I want uninterrupted power. Transferring fuel on a dead rig with 4 angry men aboard is not a quick errand. The bulk tank line runs through a lower service passage where sound carries and visibility is poor. I choose noon, when the men are more likely to be in their cabins with food or sleep pulling at them. I take the hand pump handle from the washroom ceiling, the transfer key from the bunk frame, and the pry bar from under the blanket, and I move in 1 trip. The bulk line valve is stiff but open. The pump handle bites into my palms after the first 50 strokes. Diesel climbs slowly through the sight section and into the day tank line. I keep my ears open the whole time. On stroke 70 or so, I hear a foot scrape at the far end of the passage. I stop, leave the handle in place, and kill my headlamp. A second later, Curtis says from the dark, "Need help with that?" I tell him no. He says, "You trust the gauge more than a mechanic?" I answer, "I trust the person not stealing from it." He goes quiet. Then I hear him spit into the drain and walk off. I finish the transfer and lock the pump cabinet before I breathe easier. On the ladder back up, I find a strip of tape wrapped around the rail at hand height with the sticky side out. Simple. Mean. Good way to make a person lose grip with gloved hands. I cut it off and keep climbing. That tells me Curtis or Doran has moved from theft to nuisance, and from nuisance to injury if the chance comes. I answer that by making movement harder for them too. That afternoon, I go through the nearby stair tower and dog open the fire door to a storage section I have already emptied. Then, I hang a warning tag on the opposite door that reads, "Do not open. Hot work area." There is no hot work area. There is a dead end, a slick patch of old brine, and 3 blind turns. If one of them charges through in a rush, he will learn the route once and remember it. The next failure comes from impatience, exactly where I expected it. Around dusk, a section of the port accommodation block drops dark, and the generator pitch changes for 3 seconds before settling again. I grab the meter and head for the branch panel by the galley. 1 breaker is hot to the touch and tripped halfway. I reset nothing. I trace the load first and find an extension cord shoved under a cabin door on the men's side. Fed from a galley outlet they piggybacked with a cut adapter. Inside the cabin sits 1 portable space heater from stores, an electric kettle, and a battery charger running at the same time on cable not rated for it. Curtis is in the room with Reed, and both of them know from my face before I say anything that they have bought themselves a worse night. I cut the whole branch, pull the cord, and carry the heater away while Curtis swears at my back. Reed does not argue. He is staring at the dark outlet and the dead kettle, thinking past pride toward cold. Doran comes looking for me 10 minutes later, and this time he does not stop in the pantry. He stands in the galley doorway where I can see him clear and tells me I am making a bad situation worse. I tell him no. Curtis did that with an overloaded branch and a cut adapter. Doran says men need heat. I tell him the rig needs not catching fire in a sealed accommodation block with one working generator. He says I am treating them like intruders. I answer, you are intruders in my systems. His jaw works for a second. Then he says, you don't own the sea, the steel, or the stores. I say, I own the panel keys. That gets through to him in a way the other words did not. He does not like me. He does not like the truth of his position either. He leaves without another threat, which means he is planning one instead of wasting it on talk. The next morning, Thomas knocks once on the galley fire door and asks for a word. I keep the door between us and tell him to speak. He says Curtis is pushing Doran to take the generator room while I sleep. He says Reed will go with whoever promises hot food. He says Doran wants the water line first, not the fuel, and that means he finally understands what matters more. I ask Thomas why he is telling me this. He answers after too long. I'm cold. That is honest enough for now. I tell him if he wants a place on the warm side, he follows rules and brings something useful each time, not panic. He says Doran has one bolt cutter from the deck stores and a spare lantern battery he did not declare. I tell him to leave the battery outside the washroom vent and walk away. He does both within the hour. I do not invite Thomas into the corridor after one good choice. I use the information instead. I move the panel keys again, this time into the hem of a spare coverall hanging behind the washroom door. I switch my sleeping bunk from the inner cabin to the outer one and leave the blanket pile undisturbed in the old place, so a man entering in the dark goes to the wrong bunk first. I put one mug of water on the floor outside the inner cabin door where a careless boot will kick it and announce itself. Then, I spend 3 hours on the vacuum sanitation line, which has decided to remind me that survival is not all standoffs and power plays. The main suction leg is weak, and one trap near the washroom branch has frozen with residue in it. I clear it with hot water, a length of wire, and language I keep to myself. When it starts pulling again, I feel more relief than I did when the generator first lit the corridor. Around midday, the wind shifts enough for sound to come up through the leg well, in a way it had not before. I take the binoculars down to the lower deck and look under the boat landing towards shore. Ice has packed tighter against the south side. A broken work float, one plastic drum, and a tangle of netting are jammed into the steel. The distance to shore is not crossable by a sane person on foot, but I am not thinking about sane people. I am thinking about anything that drifts, grounds, and makes a step where there was open water yesterday. On the edge of the binocular field, I catch movement on the ice line near the old service dock. 3 figures. One drops to a knee, rises, and keeps moving in no straight order, too far for details. Close enough to tell me the coast is still feeding bodies into the weather. I go back inside and add one new rule to my head. Lower access stays closed unless I am standing there. That evening, the generator hiccups under load and nearly dies. I am in the galley with a pot on and Doran on the far side of the room when the lights dip low enough to turn his face into a flat grey shape. He looks towards the ceiling. I look toward the utility deck. Neither of us speaks. I am already moving by the time the lights recover. In the generator room, I find the fuel feed cavitating again. Air in the line, not from my transfer. From a loose union on the day tank side that somebody backed off a quarter turn. A quarter turn is all it takes. I tighten it, reprime the line, and get the set steady before the lights die outright. On the deck plate by the tank is a fresh crescent of mud from a boot tread that does not match mine. Sabotage is no longer quiet now. It has crossed into any hour risk. I answer that the same night. I cut every non-essential light on the port accommodation side, including the corridor run near their cabins, and leave only the galley and the central passage lit. Then I stand in the galley and wait for the reaction. It comes from Curtis first. He storms in with the dead extension cord in one hand and asks if I think darkness will make him obedient. I tell him darkness will make him careful if he wants to keep his teeth. Doran comes in slower behind him and tells Curtis to shut up. Reed is not with them. Thomas does not show. Doran asks if this is punishment. I say, this is containment. He says, you keep saying that word like the world out there still has rules. I answer, this rig does. He looks at me a long time. then at the water containers on the counter, then at the dark hole behind him. He realizes in that moment that all his leverage depends on taking what I built without breaking it first. That is a hard problem, and he knows it. Reed comes to me after midnight with a split over one eyebrow and his hands up empty. He says Curtis swung the dead extension cord at Thomas during an argument over the battery charger and caught him instead. He says Thomas ran to the aft stores and barred himself in. He says Doran is trying to keep the group from breaking apart. I ask why he came to me. Reed says, hot water and tape. His voice is flat and tired, and he has the look of a man who joined the wrong side slowly and only knows it once there is nowhere to step back to. I clean the cut, tape it, and hand him a mug of hot water. Then I tell him one thing. Next person who tampers with the generator stays in the dark for good. Reed nods in a way that tells me he understands the sentence, even if he does not control the next move. He goes back to the port side carrying the mug with both hands. The storm peaks the following afternoon. The whole rig changes tone when the wind rises above what the dead systems were meant to sit through unmonitored. Doors rattle deeper in their frames. The vent trunks boom at intervals. Ice hammers the lower structure in hard bursts. I spend the first half of the day on maintenance I did not want yet but cannot defer. Tighten corridor door dogs. Clear brine ice from the desalination discharge. Retie the tarp over the skiff gear at the landing. Check the immersion suit where I hung it and find one sleeve half frozen to the rail. I peel it loose and move it into the stair tower. While I am kneeling there, I see something under the landing that changes the whole day. A body is wedged against the netting and the drum tangle below, face down, coat ripped open, legs moving in weak pushes against the steel as the ice shifts. Not floating anymore, held there. I back up from the rail and watch longer. The body does not drift away with the next surge. It presses, slips, and presses again. Then another shape moves through the ice shadow near the south leg. Upright, slow. Then a third, low to the steel, crawling over a jam of debris and half-frozen slush that was not there yesterday. The distance from shore did not close. The path changed. Wind and ice and junk did the work for them. It is not a clean bridge. Not yet. It does not need to be if one or two can make contact with the lower structure and stay there. I go up the stair 2 at a time and head for the galley. Doran meets me in the passage by accident or instinct. One look at my face and he knows something outside changed. I tell him the lower access is now everybody's problem. He says, "How many?" I say, "Enough." That ends the debate over ownership for a few hours. We move fast for the first time together. I assign it before anybody can argue. Curtis and Reed clear the lower machinery corridor of loose gear that can snag a door. Doran dogs the mid-level fire doors under my direction. Thomas comes out of hiding with a swelling on the side of his face and helps me carry the spare chain box to the lower stair housing. We do not talk much. The work says what it needs. Close what can funnel movement. Secure what can swing open under pressure. Leave no easy climb where a hand can reach from below and pull a latch from luck. On the lower deck, the first body under the landing has worked one arm through the netting and is striking the steel in slow, ugly hits. Curtis sees it and goes pale around the mouth. Reed backs away so fast he slams into the pipe rack. Doran swears once and grabs the chain box harder. Nobody has trouble believing me after that. We seal the lower starboard stair door with chain and a cargo pin through the handles. I know chain buys minutes, not certainty, if several bodies press at once. So I add the old deck plate trolley against the inner side and wedge the wheels. The lower machinery hatch near the desalination deck gets dogged and marked red with paint stick, so nobody opens it by mistake in poor light. Then, I take a hard look at the boat landing access and make the choice I had been avoiding. I lock the outer landing gate, leave the skiff tied where it is, and pull the boarding ladder 2 rungs higher so it cannot be reached easily from the debris jam below. If I lose the skiff later, I lose it. If I leave a simple climb, I invite the whole underside of the rig into the stair tower. The first breach does not come from brute force. It comes from a man trying to get around my rules one more time. While I am on the utility deck checking the desalination discharge in case I need to shut water down and move full-time to reserve, Curtis decides the port cargo stair gives him a cleaner route to the lower stores than the sealed corridor. He opens a side hatch I had marked for no access and leaves it on the latch while he argues with Reed over moving food. I only learn that after the sound reaches me through the deck. Not pounding. A new scrape and hollow step pattern from below the port stair. Then Reed shouting Curtis's name once and backing into the galley white-faced. I run past him, down the service passage, and find the hatch ajar with wind punching snow dust through the gap and a hand slapping against the lower step on the other side. I shut that hatch with both arms and throw the dog hard enough to wring my teeth. The body on the far side does not stop at once. It hits the steel twice more, then drags down the stair. Curtis is at the end of the corridor holding a pipe wrench and saying it got in under the cargo line. I ask him if he opened the side hatch. He says, "It was already bad." Doran reaches us a second later, reads the answer in my face, and shoves Curtis so hard he hits the bulkhead. Curtis comes back up with the wrench raised, and for 1 second I think the whole rig is going to split between men, while the lower decks fill behind us. Thomas moves between them first, not to fight, to block the corridor and scream one word that works better than any lecture. Door. We all hear the lower impact again through the steel and remember the actual problem. We spend the next hour sweeping the middle deck for every hatch and stair access that can bypass my starboard corridor or the generator route. The rig becomes a map of red marks, chain lengths, door dogs, and names in my head. Port cargo stair compromised. Lower machinery hatch sealed. South service hatch suspect. Boat landing gate locked. Galley branch live. Port accommodation dark. During the sweep, we find one lower storage room already breached from a vent grill someone had removed weeks earlier, likely the men when they first hid aboard. The grill is bent outward now, and a smear of dark residue runs across the sill where something forced through and scraped by. Not many, maybe one, maybe enough. I do not waste time counting how it happened. I rivet the spare mesh panel over the opening with sheet screws and a power driver, while Doran holds the lamp and does not say a word. When the immediate sealing is done, the real pressure starts. Generator load is up from all the movement, the water containers are scattered between sides, and tempers are frayed down to cable. Doran tells me we need one common heated area, or his side will turn on itself before dawn. He is not wrong. I do not open my corridor to 4 men on that basis either. I make the compromise the rig allows. The galley stays common ground at fixed times only. 1 hour on, dark after. Food is rationed there. Water is handed out there. No one sleeps there. No one stores gear there. Reed agrees before Doran does. Thomas nods. Curtis looks at me with open contempt and says nothing, which is worse in its own way. I post the schedule on the pantry door, and no paper will last only as long as the next problem. It is enough to get us into the night with one place that all sides can enter under terms. The next blow lands from the electrical side. Sometime after midnight, the accommodation emergency circuit trips hard enough to throw my corridor, the galley, and the radio room dark all at once. The generator below keeps running, so I know the fault is downstream. I snap on the handheld lamp and head for the panel with Doran at my back, and Curtis trying to push past both of us. Smoke smell hits first, faint but sharp. The branch panel outside the port cabins has one breaker welded in place, and the cover warm over the lower bus. I pull the whole feeder instead of trying to reset anything, and take the cover off by lamp. Inside, one jumper has been bypassed with stripped cable jammed under the lug, probably by Curtis trying to feed a dead heater line from the live galley branch. The insulation has cooked black and fused to the sidewall. If that had gone 2 minutes longer, we might have had flame inside the cavity. I look at Curtis. He cannot meet my eyes for a second, then does it anyway, and doubles down. We needed heat. I tell him the same thing I told him before, only without room left in my voice for patience. You pull tricks like this again, and I cut your whole side off the board. Doran does not defend him now. Reed looks sick at the panel. Thomas steps back from the smoke and covers his mouth with his sleeve. The repair takes 2 hours that I cannot spare. I isolate the damaged section, cut out the cooked jumper, replace 2 lugs from my kit, and reroute the branch so only the galley and the starboard corridor come back first. Port accommodation stays dead. Curtis opens his mouth once while I am tightening the last screw. Doran shuts him down with one look. That is the first time I see the group line move. Curtis is no longer the man with answers on his side. He is the man who almost burned their shelter down. We are running on less sleep than skill by the time the second night of storm lock hits. I force a schedule onto the rig before the next mistake chooses for us. One person awake in each section. No one moves alone to the lower decks. Galley access on the hour. Generator checks every 3 hours by me only. Water handout twice per shift. Doran objects to the last one until I ask him if he wants Curtis near another line or valve without me. He lets that one go. Reed does what he is told once food is set in front of him. Thomas starts helping without being asked, mostly carrying, holding, or watching doors. Curtis drifts on the edge of every task, angry and embarrassed and still looking for a way to force control back into his own hands. I never let him behind me on a ladder if I can help it. Near dawn, the lower starboard stair chain starts giving short metallic snaps. Not full failure, but the sound of links taking load in jerks. I wake from 10 minutes on the bunk, grab the lamp, and run down with Doran and Thomas behind me. The trolley brace is holding. The chain is stretched but intact. On the other side of the steel door, something bumps the lower steps and slides. When I crouch and look under the threshold gap, I see only boots, not ours, and a hand lying palm up on the landing with 2 fingers bent under the wrong way. There are at least 2 bodies out there from the sound pattern, maybe 3, enough to keep pressure on the door and enough for any person with bad judgment to think about drawing them somewhere else. I stand up and tell Doran in front of Thomas so there is no misunderstanding. If anyone opens a lower door to push this onto another section, I shut every lit space and hold the generator room alone. Doran nods once. He knows I mean it. Curtis means to test me anyway. I catch him not by instinct but by routine. My fuel log says I am due in the generator room at 6. I go at 5 instead. The outer door is cracked open by an inch, and inside I hear metal touch metal in a slow, careful way. I step in with the lamp off and see Curtis by the day tank, one hand on the feed union, the other holding the short siphon hose. He turns when I shut the door and lifts both hands halfway, not innocent, not committed. He says he was checking for leaks. I do not answer that. I step to the wall, pull the manual shutoff on the branch that feeds the galley outlets and the radio room, and let half the rig drop into dark behind us. Then, I tell him to sit on the deck with his back against the bulkhead, and his hands where I can see them until Doran gets there. He laughs once like this is theatre. Then, he hears the chain snap again from the stairwell next door and sits down. Doran arrives with Reed before the lamp battery can even warm. I do not offer Curtis excuses for him. I hold up the hose and point at the loose union. Doran looks at Curtis for a long time. The air in the generator room smells of warm diesel and wet clothes, and too many hours without sleep. Reed says nothing. Thomas comes last and takes one look at Curtis on the deck and understands enough. Doran tells Curtis to hand over his pockets. Out comes the stolen battery, 2 ration bars, my missing emergency flashlight, and one of the panel tags from the key pouch I thought I had kept secure. That one stings. Curtis had been close to the systems longer than I knew. Doran takes the items, puts the flashlight on the shelf by me, and tells Curtis he is done touching anything below the accommodation deck. Curtis starts to argue. Doran cuts him off and points at the stairwell door where the chain snaps again. "You want out there instead?" Curtis shuts up. I do not trust Doran more after that. I trust the crack inside his group. That matters more. I take the opening and make terms harder. Curtis loses galley access unless escorted. Reed handles food pickup. Thomas handles hot water pickup. Doran gets 10 minutes in the radio room, with me present if he helps me clear the lower service corridor after the storm lets up. He stares at the last condition and asks why I think he will still be here after the storm. I answer, "You're here now." He cannot argue with that one. The world outside is a white wall. The lower door is straining, and the whole rig smells of stale heat and bad sleep. Leaving is not a serious option. Control of the inside is the only game left, and I have the tools for it. The final breach comes at the worst hour, when fatigue is making fools of all of us and the storm has not decided to stop. It starts with a power sag from the generator, sharp enough to dim the galley lights and make the desalination pump kick out mid-fill. I head below at once and find the generator running hot and the coolant hose on the return side spraying a fine mist from a split near the clamp. Old hose, cold strain, maybe help from bad luck, maybe a nick from a tool days ago. The cause does not matter. The fix has to happen now. I shut the set long enough to patch the split with rubber strip and 2 clamps from my kit. But while the engine is off, the whole rig goes black except for handheld lamps and whatever battery lanterns remain. In that black, I hear something from the lower starboard stair that every worker learns to dread. Not impact. The sound of a failed chain dragging. The generator is half open, one hose loose, one clamp in my teeth when Doran's lamp hits the doorway. He does not ask what happened. He heard it too. We leave the engine open and move to the stairwell, with lamps cutting narrow tunnels through the dark. The trolley brace is gone from the door, not thrown clear, moved enough for leverage from repeated hits and one bad angle. The chain hangs twisted. The door is shut by its own weight but no longer secure. On the other side, something scrapes a boot across the first landing and presses once into the steel. I feel the whole rig narrow down to layers again. Door, stair, corridor, generator room, my corridor above. Nothing outside that sequence matters for the next few minutes. I tell Doran to get Reed and Thomas with every loose weight from the tool crib. I tell him Curtis stays away. He goes without argument. We build the brace in darkness and lamp glare. Tool chest first, spare cable drum second. Absorbent pad crate turned sideways to jam the casters. I take the chain from the south service hatch and rethread it through the starboard door handles while Thomas holds the lamp and looks anywhere but the threshold. The pressure on the far side rises and falls, never with timing I can predict. Once, while I am kneeling at the chain, fingers appear under the gap and scrape at the deck. Reed makes a noise and nearly drops the crate in his hands. Doran stamps down on the fingers through his boot sole, not out of anger, only to clear the gap so I can finish the chain. When we get the second loop tight and pin it, the door stops shifting under the next impact. It will not hold forever. It does not have to. It has to hold until the generator runs again, and I can move the rest of the rig around it. Back in the generator room, I get the hose patched, refill from the service jug, and bring the set up slower than I want. Oil pressure rises. Frequency steadies. Lights come back in slices as I close feeders by hand. Starboard corridor first, generator passage second, galley last. I leave the port side black. Doran watches me do it and finally says the thing he has been circling for days. "You can choke this whole place with one hand." I tighten the panel screws and answer, then stop trying to grab the hand. He gives me a tired look that is almost respect and almost resentment and leaves it there. Thomas helps me wipe the coolant mist off the deck. Reed goes to the galley and starts heating water without asking, which is the first useful initiative he has shown since I met him. Curtis does not appear. He appears 20 minutes later in the worst place possible, the radio room. I know before I see him, because the marine set goes from static to open carrier, and the corridor picks up a wash of sound from the speaker. I run there and find Curtis at the console with the distress mic in one hand and the beacon switch cover open. His face says exactly what he is doing. If he cannot take the systems, he will force a rescue or force everybody on the coast to come looking. I cross the room in 3 steps and hit the transmit key off his hand before he can finish whatever coordinates he was trying to send. The mic bounces off the desk. He swings at me with the back of his arm, catches my shoulder, and shoves me into the chart rack. The rack tips, charts spill. I drive the heel of my hand into his throat enough to make him back up, and then slam the beacon cover shut with my other hand. By the time Doran gets there, Curtis is bent over the radio desk coughing, and I am standing between him and the controls with the flare launcher pointed at the floor. Doran looks from Curtis to the open set, then to the beacon cover, and his face closes. He drags Curtis out of the radio room without a speech. Curtis fights him once in the doorway and nearly tears the handheld lamp out of Thomas's grip on the way past. Reed follows them with a pot towel in one hand and no idea what to do with it. I stay in the radio room until the carrier drops and the set returns to static. I do not know if Curtis got a full call-out. I heard only fragments and noise. If anybody heard it, the weather and broken networks may bury it anyway. The larger problem is not outside hearing us. The larger problem is Curtis has crossed from reckless to active sabotage when the lower stair is one failed chain away from giving way. There is no schedule or ration rule that solves that. I make the hard choice before dawn. Curtis cannot stay on the same side of any door that matters. Doran does not object this time. That surprises me less than it should. He has spent enough nights next to Curtis by now to know what the man has become under cold and fear. We move him to an aft storage room on the port side with blankets, water and one bucket, and we dog the outer door from the corridor. It is not a prison built for days. It is a stopgap to get through one storm night with one less saboteur on the move. Curtis shouts through the steel for 10 minutes, then starts bargaining, then starts blaming all of us one by one. None of it changes the math. The generator is running. The stair chain is holding. The water containers are full enough for one day. That is the line. Anything that threatens it gets isolated. Once the rig is quiet again, the silence feels worse than the shouting did. Wind, engine, far-off impact on the lower stair. Reed falls asleep at the galley table with his forehead on his arms. Thomas sits on the deck outside the pantry and keeps tightening and loosening the strap on one glove. Doran drinks hot water out of a mug and stares at the emergency lighting panel as if he can force it to become another man who will argue with him. I take that hour and clear the lower service corridor with him, while the others watch the upper doors. We work in pairs, lamps low, pry bars in hand, moving loose hose coils, a crate of filters, one folded pallet, and the old trolley frame that had jammed the stair. On the way back, we hear one of the bodies below slip down a landing and stop. Fewer impacts after that. Maybe one fell clear, maybe not. I do not check. By midday, the storm starts losing shape, not ending. Thinning enough that the wind has pauses in it and the rig stops shuddering every few seconds. I go down to the lower landing with Doran behind me and check the starboard stair through the small, wired glass window in the door. One body is crumpled against the rail halfway down, not moving. Another stands below it in the lower shadow, one hand on the wall, working at nothing. The chain held. Good. The problem is not gone. The problem is waiting on the other side of a door that cannot stay shut forever if pressure builds again, or if anyone gets stupid. On the way back up, Doran says, "When weather clears, I'm going to the dock road." I tell him he is free to go once the lower access is safe. He says nothing after that. The way he says it tells me he is testing whether freedom and safety will ever land on the same day again. Reed wakes and starts sorting the galley shelves by expiration date without being asked. Maybe to stay busy. Maybe to feel useful. Maybe to stop thinking about Curtis behind one door and the bodies behind another. Thomas brings me the missing panel tag he found in Curtis's jacket pocket when we moved him. I do not ask how he got close enough to search it. I take the tag and tuck it into the binder. Small order returns first on any bad job. Labels, logs, schedules, watermarks on containers, fuel numbers, door status. We are down to work habits holding back collapse, and I know that field well. By the time the weak daylight gets a little stronger at the porthole edge, I have the desalination unit running again, the patched coolant hose holding, and the galley schedule back on the pantry door in thicker marker, where nobody can pretend not to see it. Curtis makes the last move from the aft room near dusk. I hear it in the corridor before anyone says his name. One hard slam, then another. Then the scrape of a bunk frame being dragged inside the room. He has decided to turn confinement into leverage by wrecking what he can reach. Doran starts toward the port side. I stop him. If we open that room in fading light with the lower stair still compromised and everyone already spent, we get one more fight and one less shelter. I go to the outer bulkhead instead and kill the corridor light outside Curtis's room, the galley branch on that side, and the outlet feed nearest him. The noise keeps going for a minute, then changes. No more slams. A different sound. Heavy breathing. No. A dull, repeated knock on metal from farther down the passage. We all hear it and look toward the lower service hatch at the same time. Curtis's wrecking has covered another sound that was already there. The port lower access, the one he left bad before, has started taking pressure too. Not a full breach yet. Knocks through steel, slower than the starboard stair had been, but close enough that the difference no longer matters. Doran closes his eyes once, opens them and says, "He opened something else. He may have. Or the changing ice did it. Or one vent he used weeks ago has turned into a crawl space for the next body. I cannot prove which. I can prove the response. I tell Thomas to wake Reed and bring every loose blanket. I tell Doran to bring the tool crate and the battery lanterns. Then I go to my corridor, strip the outer bunk of bedding, and move the whole warm core one cabin inward. The rig is changing shape again. Safe route from generator to galley to corridor is no longer broad enough to pretend I have time. We seal the port side as far back as the bulkheads allow and leave Curtis in the aft room beyond the new line. I do not write a speech for that decision. There is no room for one. We open his outer door long enough to throw in 2 water bottles, 1 blanket, and a lantern with half a charge, then shut it and dog the fire door 2 sections forward. He shouts once when he understands what we are doing. Doran stands there with his hand on the latch and does not answer him. Reed cannot look at either of us. Thomas asks if he will make it. I tell him, if he keeps the door shut and the lantern low. That is the only honest answer I have. Anything more would be comfort talk, and comfort talk breaks down fast on steel when the next impact comes through a wall. Night comes down over the rig without a clean break. Only a deeper darkness outside the porthole blanket and more weight in every corridor. I make one last full round before forcing everyone to stay put. Generator sounds steady. Fuel enough for the night. Water containers full. Starboard lower stair chained and braced. Port lower side sealed back 2 compartments. Galley on low light only. Radio room off. My corridor reduced to 1 cabin, 1 washroom, 1 locker, 1 bunk. Doran sits in the pantry doorway with a pry bar across his knees, and no claim left in his voice. Reed sleeps in a blanket nest beside the galley freezer. Thomas watches the stair tower and jumps at every third sound, until the sounds start blending into one long shift of metal and wind. I sit on the bunk with the utility binder open to a page I already know by memory, and wait for something to fail where I can still reach it. Nothing dramatic happens after that, which is the part nobody believes until they have lived through a bad night. The doors hold, the chain holds, the patched hose holds. The men do not make speeches or sudden peace. We work through the dark in watches, passing hot water, checking latches, listening to impacts fade and return and fade again. Near morning the port side knocking stops. Near morning the starboard stair goes quiet too, not empty, only quiet. The storm eases 1 full step. The rig settles into that rough half stability that means survival for 1 more day. Not rescue, not safety. Only another day where the systems answer when I ask them to, and the people left aboard have learned, at least for now, that steel, fuel, water, and doors decide who gets through the winter and who does not. And that's where we'll stop for now. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and tell me how the story hit you, what moments worked, what didn't, and what you'd want to hear next. And a big thank you to everyone supporting the channel. You keep this project alive. Until next time, Survivor. Jack's Nightmares, signing off.